We are back with another Wednesday morning broadcast. I am your host, Ian Gardner. I'm a co-founder here at Innovation Bay. I'm also a VC, an investment partner with Gelix Ventures. Also give a big shout out to the Innovation Bay team. So we've got Faden Stow, my co-founder who's in Hobart, and then Shan, Claire, Sam, CJ, and Alison. So thanks to all of them. We are doing our best to support and connect the whole startup community across Australia. I'd like to, give a special thanks to Sam actually, because this fancy new webcam that I got is from Hudley, and they equipped me with it a couple of weeks ago. So it's a huge step up on the crappy inbuilt laptop one. So yeah, gradually we're building the studio out, so it's pretty exciting. So yeah, welcome everyone. I know there's a few new members, so thanks for joining us this morning. If you don't know or you haven't been before about what Innovation Bay is or who we are the longest running community for founders and investors, and in fact anyone who loves startups across Australia. Our mission is to support founders on their journey from idea to IPO and beyond, and we're doing this through a range of programs, events, and content like this. And the whole idea is to enable people to connect, learn, and grow together. So we are doing this on a new platform. It's not Zoom, you may have noticed. It's called Hopin. It's kind of designed to replicate a little bit like a real life experience, so you can kind of choose where to go. This is the main stage. We're going to hold the panel discussion up here. Once it's finished, there's a few buttons will go live on the left of the stage, and that'll be afterwards. So there's pretty good and fun networking that we can do afterwards. So I'll explain that towards the end, but we're getting most people will hang around for a little bit afterwards, and you get to meet. I get to meet the audience, which I love, and the panelists may hang around, so it should be fantastic. So we'll talk about that in a minute. Big thank you to our sponsors: AWS, IAG, Farmark Ventures, KPMG, IDF Ventures, and Macquarie Bank. We couldn't do what we do without them. And they are major supporters of us and the whole startup ecosystem. So yeah, our thanks to them, and yeah, give them some love. Go and use their services; they're really good. Right, let's talk about today's topic. Very popular, this one. I guess it wasn't a surprise. It's like, sales is a big topic. I mean, look, no matter how good your idea or your product is, you've still got to find and grow your customer base, and it's hard. How do you sell? How do you incentivize salespeople? How do you do your customer acquisition? I mean, these are all tough challenges for most people. How do you use data to understand your customer? What are the right channels to get to them? How do you get your acquisition costs down? What's scalable? What can be repeatable? It's tough. So we are going to, we have assembled a fantastic group of experts in this. We want to keep it interactive. So over on the right-hand side of your screen, there is a chat section. So if you've got any questions for the panel, please put them in there. And we'll get to them. We want to keep this as interactive as possible. So, right, I'm going to stop my slide share here and ask the panelists to click the little join button and join me up here. While they're doing that, let me just give a quick intro. We'll start with Anna. So Anna Cheng, morning Anna. She's currently a growth marketing manager at Bright. So prior to that, Anna was head of growth at Curious Things AI. And AP growth at the startup super fund Spaceship, which you may have all heard of, which she was employee number 3. So yeah, some pretty good experience that we can get into with Anna. James is joining us from Melbourne, so he's in the middle of lockdown. We were chatting before, it's pretty grisly down there. So James, thank you for doing it tough so that we don't have to. Hopefully we'll get through it at some point soon. James is a serial software entrepreneur and currently an angel investor too. He's had 2 successful exits, and his angel investor focus is generally around early stage enterprise startups. So I think that customer acquisition piece is a sweet spot for you. And Pete Mycock, we've known Pete for ages. He's a buddy of Faden's, buddy of mine. I think you've been coming to our events for 20 years, I think, Pete. So that's you're as old as me, which is terrifying. Currently GM for Japan and APAC for PartnerEyes, which we'll ask you about. So yeah, 20 years of experience building and driving growth in enterprise technology. You've worked with QAS, Experian, AOL, MySpace. God, we're going back a bit here. IGN and Criteo. So yeah, welcome everyone. Right, shall we jump into it? Look, we'll maybe just start with a more general question, just so that you can all give a little bit of an intro to yourself. So Anna, I might start with you. I mean, like, can you just give us a little bit of background to you and your role at Bright, you know, without going into too much detail, and then we'll jump onto some of the guts of the customer acquisition stuff.
Yeah, so my role at Bright is growth marketing manager, and just as like I guess like what I focus on is mostly the marketplace products. I'm also a product owner of Bright's marketplace for tradies. So for those of you who don't know Bright, the CEO hates me explaining it like this, but it's sort of like the afterpay for home improvements and solar panel installations. So basically, to pay for solar panels, for example, so what you can do is go through a payment plan that would allow you to pay that over time at 0% interest. So what I sort of do there is I basically plug up any holes that there are in the funnel. So anytime we have like a specific business problem, so for example, maybe we're not reusing, maybe customers aren't reusing our marketplace enough, then I really dive into that particular problem and try to solve it through either fixing up the product, or maybe it's something that's a little more like higher in the funnel, and I try to work on that as well. So it's sort of like very varied. Like it could go from like an awareness or acquisition sort of piece of work, or it could also be, you know, getting down into the product and working on activation, retention, and referrals. Okay, awesome. Thank you. I was just getting a note saying my audio is rubbish, so apologies if that was the case. Is it better now? Can you hear me? Pete, yeah. How's that? Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm going to jump to you now, Pete, anyway, so you don't have to listen to me. Yeah, Pete, you've been in sales for a long time. I think you love it. So, I mean, do you want to just tell us about why, why you love sales, what you're doing with it, and what your role is at Partnerize?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Ian. Yeah, the years have been probably a bit unkinder to me than you, but yeah, I think I think I've been lucky to work for some really great companies that have invested in sales and invested in the sales function. And the role at Partnerize really is that we're an enterprise technology platform that helps brands acquire new customers via partners or the affiliate channel. And so, we also work in multiple countries. So I've had the opportunity to work in markets like Japan and North America, the UK, and Southeast Asia. And so that's been sort of really interesting. And I think, I love sales because you're sort of fairly accountable and fairly measurable, and you can sort of contribute to the bottom line. So you can really make a difference in an organization. And, you're the ones who get to execute the sort of go-to-market strategy for the business. And in doing so, you get to talk to some really cool brands. So, that's why I sort of love doing it.
All right, James, should we jump to you? And you can have a whinge about the Melbourne lockdown.
I won't do that, mate. I think we're all sick of hearing about coronavirus. I think we can probably go 1 hour of video call without that. So, yeah. Look, I don't know what you want to know about me. The 30-second version, I've built and sold 3 software companies. So I started from scratch and built them up. I lived in Silicon Valley for many years, and then returned back to Australia 18 months ago.
What did you give us the sales angle on that? So, like, why, sales was material and the success of these. So, what was your thinking or philosophy around that?
Yeah, look, I guess my specialty, for want of a better expression, is being able to very rapidly establish a sales channel and really grow sales numbers very, very quickly, which enables the businesses to grow. And then fortunately I've had the exits. I found that once your business really starts to hum, there's no shortage of acquirers knocking on your door. So that's been an interesting part. What I really focus on, and my mantra, if you like, is particularly in the early stages of when you're just founding your company and growing up, one of the things I think companies really struggle with that they need to stay laser focused on is being very specific about who your customer is. It's really easy to chase different opportunities. And one of the things that I learned very on is you have to weigh opportunity versus distraction. very heavily, and particularly when you're in the early stages of a startup, and particularly when you're a founder, because we see opportunities everywhere. It's really easy to go chasing after the next shiny thing, but that can take you off topic. And being very specific to who your customer is, knowing exactly how you're going to get to them and what the messaging should be for that customer type is absolutely critical in the early stages of your growth, because once you've honed down on that niche, then you can really hammer it. And interestingly, one of the things I noticed moving from Australia to go to North America in Silicon Valley is Australians have a very confused or distorted view of the term niche. When we think of niche, we think of small.
Yeah.
But I think one of the things that I really shaped my viewpoint was, rather than thinking of it as small, thinking of it as specific. And once you can really target a specific market, then you can accelerate that growth and really penetrate that market very successfully.
Yeah. All right. Awesome. Look, thank you, all of you, just for that background. Look, we should jump into some of the more specific questions. I want to make sure that the audience is getting some takeaways here. So, I mean, the first one, I mean, you can acquire customers without selling. So, I mean, I'm going to be leaning on you, Anna, because I think, you know, as the growth marketer or the, you know, pipeline plugger versus Pete, who's a bit more of the sales. I mean, what is the difference between sales and customer acquisition? You know, because that'll vary by company. But Anna, why don't I start with you in that one?
Yeah, like for this question, I actually think that sales could just be a subset of customer acquisition. I don't think they're naturally a different thing. So I think the key difference between sales and customer acquisition is probably your business model and your target audience. So I think the whole goal of running a successful customer acquisition campaign is to discover a way to acquire customers where the cost of acquiring them is ultimately lower than the revenue that they will return to your business. I guess like a nerdier way to say this is probably for, you know, CAC to be less than CLV, or for like ROI to be positive at all times. So I think now for most B2C products, you're typically looking at a much lower customer lifetime value than that of most B2B products. So you're likely to be charging lower prices, experiencing much higher rates of churn. And like as a result of that, like success in B2C in many cases are usually just a numbers game. So I think you need relatively scalable and repeatable ways to appeal to your audience. And I guess this is what the customer acquisition channels look like for B2C products. So they tend to be like, you know, social media advertising, SEO, referral campaigns, and so on, where they tend to be like, I guess, like less human intensive and more about automation and scalable and repeatable. Yeah. And meanwhile, I think, you know, B2B companies, they sort of fall into two categories. So you've got your SaaS products and you've got your enterprise products. And I think, you know, SaaS products are typically your bottom-up self-service type companies like Slack, Atlassian, and Canva. Whereas enterprise, you've got much more customizable products like, you know, HyperAnna or Curious Thing, where I used to work. And I think getting to your first 10 customers for any of these B2B, you know, business models would often require direct sales or other scrappy things you can do that don't scale, unlike B2C models. So, and this is just because you need early customers to trust you. So whether that's tapping into, you know, personal network or seeking out where your customers are, both online and offline. But I think, you know, later down the track, when you do get to a reasonable size, like if you have an enterprise product, having a sales and business development team makes a lot of sense. This is because like you still need a lot of trust to be built at an enterprise level business. And, you know, like, you know, enterprise level businesses need like a significant amount of time to invest a significant amount of time, money, and effort into incorporating your product into their business. So sales and business dev teams make a lot of sense as a customer acquisition model for those types of companies. But I guess like for SaaS products, there's been a trend towards, you know, trialing self-serve and then getting them to upsell into higher tiers. And I think in those cases, you probably want to build something more similar to B2C customer acquisition models, where it's more inbound customer acquisition that you can to allow you to acquire leads at a high, like at scale, I guess. So popular channels for that would be like SEO or engineering as marketing tools, or simply like word of mouth.
Yeah. I mean, Pete, listening to that, I mean, like you've been involved in pretty much all of this, I think, you know, in terms of the different types of business. And you've got your SaaS bottom-up Atlassian style, safety culture style versus the, you know, expensive 20 to 100 grand per sale model. And it varies. So, I mean, like for the founders out there with different businesses, how should they specifically be thinking about this as a problem?
Yeah, it really depends. I mean, obviously on an enterprise side, there's really no distinction between sales and customer acquisition. You're just selling. I mean, I think hats off to Atlassian. They've been able to do it without salespeople. You know, and there's only a few companies that are able to acquire new customers without really selling well, like Atlassian or Snowflake, Salesforce, and these sort of companies. It also depends, I think, to Anna's point, on your pricing model. So you've got MMPs like Adjust and AppsFlyer, Kachava, who are doing mobile measurement, and they start off with a freemium model where they give it away and hopefully they can get the acquisition. But if you've got a sophisticated high-end enterprise platform, you've got too much cost to be able to do that often. So I think if you're going out into market, you need to understand that if you are offering your product for free as a way to get distribution fast, you've got to be able, it's got to be good enough to be able to be self-sufficient and self-supported, and have that pricing model to cover it. Or you need to become a vertical specialist, or have those customer proof points to be able to get that growth. But for us, it's you're always selling. Even when you've sold to a customer after a year, you're even selling again, and I think competition's driving that even more so, where your customer success teams and your sales teams and your technology teams and your engineers are all salespeople in your business, because you need all of them. It's certainly my experience.
Yeah, that's good. Great point. James, I might jump to you because you sort of wear a investor hat as well. So, I mean, this is, you hear this expression, I was there, I used to run a SaaS software business, and I used to say it to my sales people, is sales solves everything. And in many ways it does. I mean, it's not quite strictly true, but as a startup sector, we're sometimes fixated. I mean, we see, like, when we put on a fundraising or venture capital event like this, that people flock to it. So there's this glitz and glamour about getting equity finance or external finance, whereas surely the right thing to do is just to build a great product and sell it to lots of people at margin. I mean, are we as a startup sector too fixated on the equity side and not fixated enough on the sales side?
Oh, 100%. It's funny you mentioned this. I was literally having this conversation with somebody yesterday, saying that unfortunately, I think the industry now measures success by how much you've raised, not how good your business is. And I think that's, really has come out of these huge rounds that get so much publicity in your tech crunches and these kind of things. And then founders become fixated on that. And I mean, you see it time and time again. These companies turn out to be a house of cards. They raise millions and millions and millions of dollars, and then a year from now, 2 years from now, whenever it is, they collapse. Or when the other thing that we've seen a lot, I think in the last 6 months, is when they go to IPO or exit, the numbers and the revenues are, a fraction of what people are expecting them to be based on what they've raised. I totally agree. I mean, I'd never raised any money for any of my companies. Now I was lucky in that regard. But one of the things I was focused on is, if you can just sell really well and you make good revenue and you actually make a profit, what do you necessarily need to raise money for? Unless you need to raise it for a very specific thing, you're better off just being a good, profitable business that has a good, solid business model. And I think we are one of the very few industries in the world where bad businesses are stumped up with external cash. 99% of businesses out there need to have a good, profitable business model, or else they go broke. And I think we've become, as an industry, reliant. It's almost like a crutch to prop up businesses that haven't really gotten through the modeling process of, is this a good business model and will it make money? And so I think that's absolutely critical.
But it's the flip side of that. I mean, I'm not sure, I'm not aware of your portfolio or what you're trying to invest in, but there are, deep tech businesses that need to invest heavily in engineering and people, and, before they get revenue in. So are you looking at businesses like that? And I mean, so how do you, as a sort of natural sales inclined investor, talk to your portfolio when you're coming in?
Sure. Look, it does vary, because yes, there are some companies that are very deep tech, really heavy stuff, but they're actually, in my experience, fewer than you expect. I think a lot of companies that consider themselves to be really deep tech the systems aren't that complicated, you know, project management systems and team management systems and, you know, all these collaboration platforms that were all the rage, say, 12 months or so ago. When you really strip the, you know, look under the bonnet, the technology is not that complicated. And therefore, I challenge these founders on why do you need to hire a team of 30 developers to do this, when what I'd rather see is a team of 30 salespeople. You know, if you want my money to invest, and just putting on my investor hat, I'd rather see the energy go into that and prove that you can actually sell this thing and make money off this business model, rather than what I think, again, we've lost the way a little bit in the industry because of these access to funding, is that we build these incredibly complex products and 90% of the features people don't use, or use sparingly. The old adage of, you know, your MVP, you should look back on it 5 years later and be embarrassed about it. I believe that. I think that's true. I'd rather see the product in market and get proof points that people actually need this thing and actually use it and will pay for it, rather than some incredibly sophisticated product that has every bell and whistle, but you don't really have any proof points yet about whether anybody is actually willing to pay for this thing.
Yeah. Look, that was going to be my next question anyway, and I'll throw it to all of you, and it's related to that question, James. So, and I might start with you in this one, but look, in most tech companies and startups that are probably on this call, there's this natural tension between the sales team and the engineering team. It's like the engineering team want to build it perfectly and make it amazing, and the sales team are just like, give me it, I'm going to go and sell it. Is this a good tension? Because I think I've heard people play it to the advantage. Is tension a bad thing, and you just got to try and you know, iron it out? Yeah, how do you avoid this, and how do you think about it? So we'll start with Anna and then jump to you, James.
Maybe this is another. I think maybe this is like another business model sort of question as well. I think in most organizations where engineering is held as a completely different silo from, you know, your marketing team, from your sales team, I think technology tasks to support marketing tend to always get deprioritized. And I've sort of experienced this as well in a few companies I've worked for, where we've had separate engineering teams and separate marketing team or sales team. And I think, like, in most cases where they're kept in separate silos, marketing often needs to fight, you know, tooth and nail just to get a little bit of an engineer's time. And I think this is a recipe, you know, for failure going forward. I don't think the tension is a good thing. I think, you know, marketing, tech or product, and like data resources should all work together in the same team based on, you know, what sort of product you're working on. And I think in this case, in this type of scenario, you don't really just sprinkle, you know, marketing and sales on top of the product as an afterthought. Like, the product would be used as a vehicle for, you know, growth and sales, and it's ultimately driven by the data that you're receiving from feedback from your sales team and from the customer success team and things like that. And I've tended to see, like, those models work really well. So an example of people who work like that is Canva. Like, that's the sort of way that the teams at Canva are structured.
Yeah. And James, you seem to want to jump in that, you know, the tension between sales and engineering.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Yeah, no, it is definitely a balancing act, and it is a constant tension. One of the things that I always encourage, particularly when companies are very new and you're just starting out and your teams are quite small, have both parties, both sides, work together on a problem. So if you've got a sales call, get one of the engineers just to sit in on the call. They don't have to contribute anything, particularly now with COVID. It's very easy to just join in on a Zoom, so that they can get an understanding of what a salesperson goes through when they do this stuff. Because I think part of the problem is that the two sides don't really have an appreciation of the efforts involved on the other side. You know, salespeople don't know what it's like to be an engineer, but conversely, the engineers often just have this opinion that salespeople just go for coffees all day and play golf and you know, don't really do any work. And I think it's important for both sides to get exposure to understand how difficult both jobs are. They're different and their challenges are different, but they are challenging. And I think, you know, for the engineers to sit in on a sales call, as an example, is a really good way for them to get an understanding of what it's like to be the salesperson, trying to close a deal with a resistant customer, an unproven product, and all this kind of stuff. I think particularly in the early stages when you're trying to build that culture, it's something that's really important. Trying to do it later when you've got lots and lots of staff is hard, but in those early stages when everyone's working together, I think it's a great way to build that culture and try and break down that barrier between the two teams a little bit.
Those are great insights. Pete, I want to hear your thoughts on this one.
Yeah, it's been an interesting topic for us. I think, I think there's a few things you can do. I totally agree with James. If you define your ICP at the outset collectively, then you there's less issues, right? Because you know exactly what you're going for and what you have to build for that particular customer. I think I've seen other companies do well. Like I think Rockstar Games has basically given equity to the engineers, because if they can code better stuff, they get a clip of the ticket for the Grand Theft Auto product that sells well. Now, not all engineers are motivated by money or equity, but if they're aligned to the same common business objective as the shareholders, then that can sort of take issues away. And the third thing that I think James touched on as well is we always, our premium customers, so obviously we're a global business. Our headquarters are out of the UK, but we have a lot of business in the US and Asia. We will fly our top customers to the UK to meet with our senior engineers to tell them what they think of the product and what else they could do with the product. And it's sort of aligned to James's point by getting the engineers in the meeting. If they meet, because they don't see what happens with the code that goes in, they don't see you at the coalface, and we don't see, the engine room that has to deliver this product. And we're processing quite a lot of data with some of the biggest, global customers in the world. So I think if engineers hear from customers what it means to them, that can really think, okay, if I'm going to be coding 9 hours a day, I'm actually motivated to do something different. And I think that can really help. So definitely define your ICP, make sure you're aligned, with your engineer on what that product is, and get them in front of your customers.
Yeah, there's a great chat going on in the chat room. So thank you, everyone. And we will get to some of the questions. Just want to ask a couple more. So Pete, I might stay with you here in that, just doubling down, you said it a little bit there, just the focus that PartnerEyes has on ROI and using data to track and make better decisions. How, and that cascades through to using partnerships and channels to market. So how, let's maybe ask the question around channels. So like for the founders out there wondering whether to go direct or via channel, like what are the sort of the macro decision parameters they should think about?
Well, I think again, depends on the product, but for obviously high volume B2C, and you're looking at acquisition, there's display, there's search. Obviously, we're in the affiliate sector, which is obviously a great channel and it's well proven. So I think Amazon Associates does about $12 billion a year. And for most enterprise brands, it's about 30% of their online budget goes into affiliate and partnerships. So I think the good thing about that channel is it allows you to test, because you're only paying on performance. So if you get a sale or a customer or a sign up or a subscription, then you're only paying for that, for that event, if you like, or that return. And the other thing you get, and we're seeing this a lot now in Southeast Asia with the growth of the influencer channel and community, where you don't have to pay $5,000 to a blogger to talk about how cool Beyonce's handbag is. You need to make sure that's much more measurable and accountable. And so there's some really cool tools out there. We're working with a company called Affable, who has a great influencer platform, and that's a great way to get awareness and branding for your product. And we've already seen how well that works. If we see the sort of the TikTok phenomenon, depending on who Trump's going to allow them to buy recently, that gets you that awareness. And what the affiliate channel does is the ability to automate that and to kind of control and report on it, to measure it, if you like. So I think that's if you're starting out, it is a great way to test new markets. But I think you should consider all channels, whether that is search or retargeting or display or mobile. But the affiliate channel is one that you can measure. And is also well proven. Just on that, I might jump to you, Anna, because you must use a lot of data to drive your decisions and where you focus your time and effort. So can you talk about the use of data at Bright and how you make better decisions as a result?
Yeah, I think I get asked this question a lot, which is how do you balance, like how much data do you need to make the decision? And I think there's a difference between how to decide on strategy and how to decide on optimizing small tactics. And I think ultimately with strategy, I'd actually say you would steer away from like looking at too much data. In many cases, when you're just starting out your company, you have like no data or you have bad data. And I think strategy is best, solved by, really understanding your customer and the competitive landscape that you're operating in. And then I think once you've sort of developed your strategy on how you're going to grow the company, then you use data to test the assumptions. And I think that's when data plays a much bigger role in helping you grow your company. And the best way to sort of do this is, I guess, like, probably spoken a lot about is like, the lean startup framework, which is just the idea of, coming up with the assumption or hypothesis, building out like an MVP to test it, and then looking at the results and then feeding that into your next experiment. And that's probably, a good way to do it. But the reason I say don't use it for strategy is just because, an A/B split test can tell you the difference between what's better between A and B, but perhaps maybe C was a better path. And I think a lot of that comes from intuition. So the way, I think we at Bright use data is, we first start off with data analysis. So we understand the meaning of what the data means to identify, understand, and pinpoint what the solutions are. Then we sort of go into some level of quantitative modeling. So how do we translate that historical data into a more forward-looking model to simulate what the future is? So this helps us understand, how to better do what we're doing today. And I think the rest of like what you do with the data is very dependent on, things that aren't data related. So things like user psychology, like how well do you understand your users, because data doesn't matter ultimately unless you know how to influence the numbers in a more authentic way. So this comes to understanding your audience, your problem, and your solutions and what they respond to. And like I think probably the most important thing, and something that's I guess like hyped up a lot now, is about storytelling. So you could be good at everything, but it's sort of useless unless you can bring all those things to life in a compelling and interesting way to your target audience. And I think that's what storytelling is. So I think data sort of sits like at the back of everything you're working on, and it's more about delivery a lot of the times when it comes to growth.
I'm going to jump to some questions from the audience, and I wasn't going to ask this one, but it just came in. I think it's really good and linked to that. So from Jane Bianchini, question around B2B sales. James, I'll throw this to you. Everyone's now turning to blogs, white papers, LinkedIn marketing, email nurturing, etc. Basically, let's try and do some scalable selling. How do you get through to clients now that they're just getting bombarded with all this stuff?
Yeah, it's interesting. I have a sort of a contrarian view to that. Very rarely use that stuff in my companies, to be perfectly honest. The reason for this, everybody else is doing it. Right? The part of sales is you need to stand out. You need to get that mental awareness from the client about how do you differentiate yourself. So we were much more about personal interaction. Shake their hands, kiss the cheeks, have a cup of coffee, sit down, build the relationship with the client. Now, my products were enterprise customers, so that's the focus that we always had. But I think it makes the world of difference because everybody else is doing that other stuff. So, as an example, and this is something that the audience can take home, I cannot stress this enough about the number one sales technique that we had in all of my companies, and I still use today in the companies that I'm involved with, is after every meeting, you send that person that day straight away a handwritten thank you card. 2 sentences. Thanks for your time today. It's great to meet you. Good luck with the project that you're working, whatever it is. That kind of stuff gets 10 times the traction and notice than writing a blog does.
Right.
Because it's memorable. Right? A week later, no one's going to remember the blog that they read. A month later, no one's going to remember that post that you put up, but they'll remember the card that they got. Right? So I'm actually not a huge fan of all that blog stuff. It's great for SEO and all that kind of stuff. So I'm not saying don't do it. But what I am saying is, in my experience, and people can take what they want, is that particularly in the early stages when you're trying to build your sales channel and you're trying to identify who your perfect customer type is, what that profile looks like, the personal interactions are 10 times more valuable than any of that online stuff, in my experience.
So, I mean, the extension of that is once everyone starts sending a personalized postcard, you're going to need the next thing. Is that right?
Sure. But at this stage, nobody's doing it. So that's okay.
Send them a fax.
Yeah, cool.
Sorry, Pete, you go.
Yeah, sorry to cut you off, Joe. I was just going to follow up on James's point. I think you need to be definitely from a personalized standpoint. I mean, we're selling enterprise technology, and it's a 9-month root canal. And so you need to be you need to build relationships up with these organizations because they're going to be spending the next 5 years with you. So it's a long-term process. You need trust, and you're not going to get that with a blog every 2 weeks. I think a lot of that information can definitely help. But I think you need to do something specific and keep testing. And one of the areas that I could recommend is obviously we have BDR teams that are doing a lot of outreach, and you have to get quite sophisticated in terms of the personas you're targeting and the messaging you're using. And we started using a platform called Vidyard, which basically the BDR sends a little video message. I mean, it's kind of a bit weird. In LinkedIn, you get this video link of the person doing a pitch, but the conversion rate is up 30%. So we've been trying that in America, and now we've started doing that in Southeast Asia. So if you can increase that hit rate, because that's a lot of the time period is getting that first meeting with the CMO of Telstra, it's probably going to take you 6 months. So if you can reduce those timeframes progressively more and more and more, you reduce your sales cycle and you increase your time to revenue. So Vidyard was the application, I think, that's been successful for us.
Yeah, I think Claire's just posted the link in the chat if you want to check it out, everyone. I mean, just on that point, Anna, I mean, both James and Pete were talking there about, I guess, experimentation, and cut through and being different. I mean, Bright's done pretty well with this. So, I mean, how experimental do you get with your marketing and campaigns?
Like something that I always sort of say with, like a lot of B2C marketing, something I'd always say is that a lot of the times there are no like new ideas. Like what you're really doing is you're just translating, things that have worked for consumers from a psychological standpoint, from I guess like old technology to new technology. So, for example, like one of my most successful campaigns, probably not at Bright, was at Spaceship, which was the campaign I ran to build up a wait list of 40,000 people, which converted into $100 million in funds under management in 4 months. It was a very simple campaign that, had been working for years. So the one that I ran was, it was like a wait list campaign, very similar to Robinhood's, if you're familiar with that, where basically, you put in your email and then we said, hey, you're in group 36, fill in all this information, including your address and your phone number, and then we'll bump you up 10 groups. And then from then on, for every person that you refer onto the wait list, we'll bump you up an extra 5 groups. So by the time you've referred 5 people, you'd be in group 1 to get access to Spaceship. And this was all pre-launch. And that was actually one of the most successful campaigns we'd run. And we obviously built up, a long wait list. We had generated a lot of hype for the business. And off the back of that, we were able to raise off a lot of really cool investors like Sequoia, NEA, and Valar Ventures. And, like when I look at that, I was like, there was nothing particularly new about it. All I did was, take an idea that's been working for decades. So the idea of, chainmail, FOMO, social affirmation and things like that. Like, people have been passing letters from letterbox to letterbox for ages, saying, write your name here and you'll be, rich in the future. And then you pass it on to the next letterbox. And then forward that to a couple of decades. And then you've got on MSN, people are sending, messages like, if you don't forward this message on to 7 friends, you'll be ugly forever. And I think like this sort of idea has always worked and has always been viral. And all you really do is you just take it onto newer platforms so that you get more distribution. And I think when I come up with marketing campaigns, a lot of that is like what I think about. And then like from experimentation point of view, again, it's just more about like, how can you optimize this? So, like what is the key messaging that you might want to change and things like that. But I rarely ever use like optimization or experimentation for like the strategy side. Or if I do use it for strategy side, it's not often like things that, you tweak with like small pieces of data, but like massive experiments, like trying out like an entire new channel and things like that. Yeah.
All right, let's take another question from the audience. So Stuart Snyder, let's jump to you. So what is the best way to sell software to large enterprises that require sign off from multiple layers of management, like a skeptical CIO? So I guess this is not quite fundamental sales process, because if you've got an expensive, complicated product, then it is hard to get it in. So James, any insights? What's the best way to break down these multiple barriers?
Yeah, the short answer is press the flesh. I mean, I know that's an oversimplified view, and it probably doesn't help the question, sorry, with anything, truly insightful. But at the end of the day, big corporations, the main thing you're going to be competing against, and I literally just did a presentation for this for a company the other day that I'm on the board of. The main thing you're competing against in big enterprise is often not another competitive software company. It's unlikely that someone's pitching head to head with you, particularly if you've got something innovative, because chances are others don't have what you've got. The biggest competitor is usually the status quo. It's whatever that company's been doing for the last 10 years, trying to get them to change that behavior, and that corporate ingrained culture is often the biggest challenge, because they're risk averse, and the dollars involved with buying your product are typically a fraction of the dollars involved with changing the behavior to get people to use the product on scale. So in terms of that sales process, you have to work out who's who in the zoo, and then understand that the three categories of people that I always talk about with my sales teams is buyer, influencer, and user, right? And work out who's who in the zoo and what. So the buyer is the person that's ultimately going to sign the check. That's the person that's going to pay for this thing. The influencer is somebody like the CIO, the procurement department, people that can aren't necessarily going to use the product, but they can put a spanner in the works about buying the product. And then the user is obviously the person who on a day-to-day, week-to-week basis is going to be using your software. The more you can drive those three personas to be the one person, if you can get your buyer to also be the user, then you can speed things along a lot more. Yeah? So that's what you've got to work out, is within the organization, who are those three roles, and how do I accelerate the process of bringing those roles either together or getting them to complement each other. And the one thing that I was a huge fan of, your best salesperson is someone that works for the company that you're trying to sell to. So if you can get a user to fall in love with your product, and particularly a user of influence, someone that's higher up the food chain, get them to do the selling for you. Get them, you enlist them, and you provide them with all the information that they need, and you make it idiot-proof for them. But get them to be agitating up the food chain to the CFO, to the CMO, to whoever it is. We really need this thing. It's amazing. Because someone selling from inside for you is going to be, 10 times more effective than you selling from outside. So, I mean, this is a topic we could literally talk all day, because it's not easy. But as a 1 minute version, those are the kind of things working into big corporations that I always aim for.
That's great response. I saw Pete nodding all the way through that. So I won't follow up with you, Pete. I want to ask you a different question. I mean, Pete, your entire career has been in sales and sales management, and everything around there. So again, I kind of asked you this at the start, but why do you love selling? And why should either founders or potential employees for startups want to get into sales?
Well, maybe don't do it. Look at me. I mean, I'm a cynic after 20 years. I'm sure James will agree. But yeah, I think, why do it? I think you've got so much autonomy and freedom. I mean, as an entrepreneur, when you start your own business, you dictate, when you're going to get out of bed and how many hours you're going to do and what you're going to do. So it's the same in sales. You basically have to make things happen. And that autonomy and that freedom is great. Now with that comes, the sort of Damocles that you're measured every 90 days. So, you have to have a sales plan that allows you to deliver your number, and you have to have a reliable methodology. And we use actually one called Strongman, which has been proven for 25 years, which talks to some of the points that James just covered in the last question. But you need a forensic process, because you're going to fail 66% of the time, basically. So you need to have enough pipeline. And Bill McDermott, the ex-CEO of SAP, has always talked to this in the Harvard Business Review. You can only ever control your pipeline. You can't really control the outcome. And there's lots of things you can do to obviously manage that process, but you can control what's going into the funnel. So I think if you're going into sales, you do need to sort of pause for thought and think about it, because it is a profession. And it takes a lot of personal development time to actually educate yourself and learn about the sales process. I think if you're going into it, a great way to start, if you're sort of earlier on in your career, is to start off in a BDR role and to learn about the customer. The first thing we do with our new BDRs is we get them to meet our top 5 or 10 customers, and they'll tell you exactly what they think about the product. And so very quickly, you understand all elements of what's going on in the business, from product, from integration, from customer success. And then when you're on a call with a prospect, you're far more informed to actually add value to that kind of conversation.
Yeah.
And I think the other thing, just the other point is obviously the buyer has changed very significantly over the last 20 years since when I started, when you could actually call somebody up and have a conversation. Now you have to rely on the panache or the finesse of an email to actually get through to somebody. But you need to be preparing for that time where you get 30 seconds that you've got to deliver a world-class pitch to get a 30-minute meeting. And the more you can sort of train and practice for that time, because as James said, the CMO or the CRO at Telstra, they haven't got time. They've got too many things to deal with than take your call. And there's 20 other or 50 other very good salespeople, probably better than you. So you have to work harder and you have to work smarter, but you have to perfect your value proposition. And by doing that, and it's the same for an entrepreneur when you're going to take money from a VC, really do your research on the VCs, like really do your research on the organization, and find out what personally makes that individual or that organization tick. Yeah. So the other point, just to finish off, was check the culture of a business, because you choose the customer you inherit, you're stuck with them. So make sure that their culture is aligned to you. If the first question I always ask is, are you forward thinking and open to new ideas? And if the answer is no, then let's move on to the next one, because you know it's going to be hard. You really work on picking who your customer is.
Yeah.
Can I? Sorry, yeah. I just wanted to add something. What Pete was talking about, what motivates you? Why would you want to get into sales and all this stuff? Which is a really valid question, actually. I'm going to add something. It's the rush. The thing that I loved throughout my career, and I still love it today, is when you get that purchase order, when something you've been working on for weeks or months or whatever it is, it was never about, for me, it was never about commission or anything else. It's the rush of closing the deal. And when you've been a salesperson, you win the deals, you know how good it feels. It's amazing. Yes, it's live by the sword, die by the sword, and that's part of the excitement of the job. But for me, it was always anything in life where you put the investment in, you build it up and you put in the energy, and then it comes off and you win, it's such a good feeling.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that when I interview salespeople, that's an answer that I'm looking for, because forget your commission, forget all that stuff. What I want to know is, do you love to sell to people?
Yeah. And I think, just to follow up on James' point, I think the other really key point is just the people who I like to hire, the ones who are dead curious, because the best salespeople ask the best questions, best need impact questions. And what is the impact of not doing this? The answer is normally nothing. So the best salespeople I've met in my life have really perfected the skill of asking the best questions.
Nobody's mentioned money, and the reality is that if you're a good salesperson, you can make really good money. Is there a reason you didn't mention that? Anyone want to jump in on that, Pete?
No, obviously, the money's great. Yeah, I mean, if you can make a lot of money, of course you are. If you can, my advice is, if you're a salesperson who's looking to join a business, I always chose a company that was doing revenues of sort of 2 to 4 million. So you could get into the business early, get some equity in the business, and then you can really, drive the growth of that business, and you can really make good money. So I think, commission and equity in a business at an early stage, you can do very well. And to James's point, obviously you're getting the rush of really, being a fundamental strategic part of that organization.
Yeah. James, do you want to?
I've actually seen the money thing change a bit over the last 10 years, because I think as engineering salaries have gone up and up, and performance bonuses for engineers have gone up and up, I don't think there's such a disparity anymore. Yes, if you're a crushing salesperson, you make good commission, you make great money, no doubt about it. But for the average salesperson, in terms of, if you're in it for the money, you're probably not motivated by the right thing, because you can now make safer money going into engineering, where it's a natural salary, and you can earn big money doing that stuff now. Is it going to be as big as a successful salesperson? No, but it's a lot safer. So while the money is important, I think to Pete's point, equity and getting stock is probably where the payday is going to come in. And I guess the difference from a salesperson is you can tangibly move the needle by closing deals, drives the value of the business up, and that's how you get your payday.
All right, we're into the last sort of 5 minutes, so there's a couple more topics I want to cover, so we might move on from talking about making money. And I want to throw back to you. So, I mean, just correct me if I'm wrong here, but Bright does sell through distributors as well as direct. Is that right?
Yes, actually, surprisingly, that's actually a massive channel for us. So 90% of our sales actually come from our tradies. So our tradies would offer Bright at point of sale.
I have a question for you then. This came in from John Sandbrook. And it's a question around how you best approach, the sales activities or the customer acquisition activities when you're working with these third parties versus direct. So, yeah, what is the difference?
Oh, I think there's a big difference. I feel like, James and Pete probably have already touched on this, but I think working, is the question around how to acquire the tradies, or?
I guess it's managed because when you're managed, because I've my startup back in the day was doing the same thing. We had a direct sales approach and we tried to sell through channels as well. And it was quite, I remember having to put on almost a different thinking hat whenever I was thinking about each side. So yeah, it's more, when you think about your distribution or your tradies, how do you think about managing them as your sales people almost rather than just going direct?
Yeah, so I think this is the fun part of working at a marketplace is so on the tradie side, what you end up seeing is you do need to build in getting our tradies on board is very sales or business development manager driven. So bringing them on into the business, actually onboarding them and taking them through a journey that used to be literally just like a human, telling them what to do, training their team. And then, over time, we've been able to automate that so that, for example, single agent tradies could just go online and do a quiz and things like that. Whereas bigger organizations still get onboarded manually. And I think a lot of it is just once you sort of understand the process, then eventually you can start automating small pieces of it and then scaling that at large. And I think even, acquiring these tradies has been typically quite manual. Like I said, for a lot of B2B businesses, the way you do bring them in is very sales driven. And for us, we literally went back to very old school door knocking, sending, pamphlets in suburbs that we know that they operate in and things like that. So it's actually been quite scrappy and non-scalable at the beginning. And then eventually, we're working on scaling that. So we actually ran our first brand campaign. So I spoke to, people at High Pages and things, so really understand tradie audience, where do they look for, where do they look for financing tools and things like that. And what they told me was, radio is a massive channel for them. They always spend the time in the car. They're always listening to radio on the job. So we did a random radio campaign recently on Carl and Jackie O show, as well as as well as Triple M, and that worked really well and brought in, a significant amount of home improvement tradies. But I think a lot of that is about first you need to really spend a lot of time doing, the non-scalable, very high intensity sales sort of stuff. And then eventually, when you're trying to scale up that process, then you can start looking at, where are my customers? Where do they hang out and what do they look at? Yeah. And on the flip side of the marketplace, you've got the direct channel, which is, how do I go direct to consumer? And the good thing about having tradies is that, they're literally your referral. So if a tradie you're a customer and a tradie saying, hey, you can use Bright, hundreds of my customers previously have used Bright. That level of trust is already inherently built in that conversation. And that makes the sales through the tradie so much easier. Whereas, if you're going direct to consumer, you don't have that level of trust yet. And I guess this is what we're working on. We've never really done direct to consumer well, or we never really tried, in fact, which is the key reason why I joined Bright in the first place. I just saw a massive opportunity there. Yeah. So I think building up that trust is extremely important, whether that's, being extremely visible on Google, having being available on those review sites like Product Review, Trustpilot, things like that, where people just Google you and they can build up that level of trust immediately. I think that's the massive thing. Yep. And for the consumer side, it's also extremely UI UX driven. So the product experience matters a lot. So, load speeds of anything more than a second usually means like a drop off, and that means digital tracking is extremely important as well. And I think so you just have to have an extreme focus on customer experience.
Yeah, and I'm going to jump in here because we've got maybe 2 minutes left, maybe less actually. And there's a question we haven't asked, which I think is fundamental, just around hiring. I was terrible at it. I probably had 2 or 3 heads of sales that just didn't really fire, and I just didn't know how to interview them or think about the commission structures or anything else. So, Pete, I'll start with you, and if you can keep it fairly snappy, but what is the best way to hire sales talent in particular, but also, by extension, marketing talent?
Yeah, as you say, big topic. I think you really need to be clear on what your profile is. It's sort of an art and a science. So you need some logic to go behind it in terms of the qualities and skills that you're looking at. And you need a defined process. I don't think you need 15 interviews like Google has, or a day at Amazon to get into Amazon, which you went through, Ian.
Yeah.
But you do need a process. It needs to be collaborative. And you need, one thing we do is we always get our candidates to present, how would you sell our platform to an advertiser? And it really tells me about how much they've thought about the research. I'm not looking for them to do a Picasso presentation, but if they can come back with some intelligent thoughts about our industry and how they go about it, it shows me that they've thought about it. So I'm looking for people who are obviously, passionate and ambitious and driven and curious. And are also, that's what, and James touched on it before, it's not so much about the money. It's like, I want to work for your company and this is why. And that gives me a lot of comfort in that.
James, last word with you, and if you can keep it to a minute, but you must have hired or been involved in hiring tons of senior salespeople. And
so apologies, I got a visitor, the joys of working at home. 2 things that I would say that I found critical. Number 1, don't be in a rush, right? One of the things that we make a decision, right? We need a salesperson, and then we think, we're going to start this process. We need to hire somebody next week. No. Take your time. You've lasted this long without that salesperson. You can last a little longer. Take your time to find the right person. The other thing, and this is a thing that I found was the real game changer with our recruitment for salespeople, is ask your customers who the best salesperson they've come across recently, and go and poach that person. Because if they're buying from them for another product or service, they already, know your customer and know the relationship and everything else, but also they've all made a mark and prove that they can do it. Yeah. So I had great success from salespeople going to my biggest customers and saying, who's the top 3 salespeople that you've bought another product from in the last 12 months? And Bill Smith and Jenny Jones. Well, I want to meet Bill Smith and I want to meet Jenny Jones now.
Yeah.
And then those people turned out to be consistently good operators. So that's a little trick that I learned along the way.
All right, look, we are just about to tick at 9 o'clock, and I've still got a couple more slides to talk through. And then we got the networking. So Anna, James, Pete, that was awesome. Like, some great chat as well. So thanks everyone for being involved here. Hang around for the networking. James, Anna, Pete, I might ask you to click your leave button and skedaddle from the stage while I just wrap things up for everyone. Thank you. Let me just share my screen. All right, so that was today. That was a lot of fun. Really enjoyed that. So now we are going to jump into the networking piece in a sec. So you can either join this randomized one-to-one networking, which is in the little handshake at the bottom, or there will be sessions, and hopefully some of the panel will be in there, so you can just join in and have a chat. So it's just like sitting around a table and chatting. Next week we've got most of the panel. We've got one still to fill here, but yeah, it's all about EdTech. So we've got some of the best experts in this space. We've got Andrew Barnes from Go1. We've got Tim Power, who's now at Inquisitive, but was previously Mathletics. He's amazing. Like, yeah, Gelix invested there, and it is an astonishing business. So lots of insight there. It's a tool for teachers, and Go1 is a, he calls it Spotify for training. And Murray has been around in the startup ecosystem forever, so he's now at UTS, so obviously has some expertise in that. So we're going to be talking about education and learning. Accelerate, we might have mentioned this last week, but Accelerate 2020, part of X15 Ventures. They're looking for tech startups who can help younger Australians getting ahead with innovative digital services and any other solutions that's going to help them, whether it's their studying, working, just in life in general. So there's some good reasons to participate in that. Yeah, you get a 2-day program and you get some mentoring, you get workshops and some other stuff. So well worth having a look at that. So Bitly, down at the bottom, Bitly Accelerate 2020. One more slide. We have Olivia Humphrey, just Faden interviewed her on the podcast last week and it was awesome. So please check it out. Finally, thank you once more to our sponsors. So Macquarie, KPMG, AWS and IAG Pharmark, we love you. And of course, we love our audience. So, and I'm going to get to meet some of you now, so which I love. So I'm going to sign off. I'm Ian Gardner. I've been your host today. We're here to support you. So I'll see you in the chat rooms. Catch you later.